Welcome to the Why Factor, a chance to work out why we do what we do. BBC World Service podcasts are supported by advertising.
Thanks for downloading this edition of The Why Factor, a programme that seeks to find out why we do the things we do. I hope you enjoy it. BBC World Service. I'm Mike Williams with The Why Factor. Do you think you're rational? Do you think you're reasonable, fair? Do you think that all men and women are created equal? Think again, because almost certainly you're biased. Maybe against women, fat people, or people of colour. Not consciously prejudiced, perhaps, but unconsciously biased. The Orchestra of the Age of Enlightenment.
It is incredibly difficult to switch off one's eyes.
Nick Logie plays viola and sits on the judging panel for prospective new members.
The moment we see somebody walking into a room, the way they walk, what they look like, the way they hold their instrument, in my case the viola, I'm going to be looking at the way they hold the bow and thinking, gosh, I'm not sure that's the best way to do it. That's not terribly efficient. I'm going to be making all these judgments without even being aware of it.
For a long time, psychologists have been worrying about a particular question. How do we get to know what is really going on inside the mind of a person? And so the simplest way, of course, is to just ask them.
Mahzarin Banaji is Professor of Psychology at Harvard University and co-author of Blind Spot, Hidden Biases of Good People.
There are two reasons to worry about those sorts of data when people answer questions on a survey. One is that they really are concerned about how they will appear to you, and so they might say something that they may not actually mean. But much more interesting to me is the possibility that they don't even know their own minds.
It's a worrying thought that we don't actually think what we think, that somewhere within our brain something is skewed, that we have a hidden propensity for discrimination.
We seem to have a problem in terms of seeing the defects in our own decision-making anyway, and bias is just one of those defects in our decision-making.
Dr. Pete Jones is a psychologist who works in the area of unconscious hidden bias.
We don't like to be able to reflect on our decisions and think that they were error-prone. So therefore we seem to have a blind spot and we hide those from ourselves.
The disparity between what I say, what I believe, what I say are my values. I am an egalitarian on the one hand, and then observe my behavior. How do I make my hiring decisions? Which students do I call on in my classroom? If I'm a police officer, when does my hand move towards my gun?
When I go into a reception of a large company, and it happened here at the BBC today, I see females acting in receptionist roles. And if I keep on seeing that pattern, I start to create a neural pathway in my brain between women and receptionist.
So does that mean if you see a male receptionist, there's something jarring to you?
What the unconscious continues to do, if it doesn't see a lot of male receptionists, it puts that male receptionist to one side and says, that's atypical of what I see in receptionists, therefore I'm going to continue, until you teach me otherwise, to see the association between females and receptionists.
A young boy and his father are driving along on a highway and they get into a terrible car accident. The father is killed on impact and the young boy is severely injured and they rush the boy to hospital.
Yasmin Abdul-Majid.
When they get to the hospital, the surgeon looks at the boy and says, well, look, I can't operate. Why? Well, this boy is my son. And often people are like, well, how can that be? The father just died in the car accident. And the answer, of course, is the surgeon is the boy's mother. And the reality is that most of us, we tend to assume the first image that we have in our mind of a surgeon is of a man. And so that changes the way that we think about that story.
So what do you know about Yasmin Abdul-Majid? Some clues.
I was born in Sudan. My family is a mix of Sudanese, Egyptian, Turkish and Moroccan, but generally I'm a woman of colour, I'm Muslim, and I've worn the hijab since I was 10 years old.
I wonder if you can see her more clearly now. Can you picture her in the street, at home? Can you see her in overalls and a hard hat, working as a mechanical engineer on an oil rig? Because that's what she does for a living.
Most people do not believe that they have a shred of bias. And it's very difficult to set something aside when you don't believe you have it.
So how do you measure this?
What we design are tests that make a certain assumption.
The assumption is this: if for all your life you've been subjected to messages that link one type of person with a certain trait, white good or fat bad, for example, and then you ask to flip those associations, white bad, fat good, well, then the rational, unprejudiced you will be okay with that. You'll be able to make those associations, but you'll do it slower, measurably slower. I'm online doing the Harvard IAT, the Implicit Association Test, and this one is on gender and career.
Imagine that you're told, whenever you see a female name, like Sally, or a word that represents the world of home things, a word like kitchen or child, press the left button of your computer. Whenever you see Mark, a male name, or a work-related word, like boardroom, please press the right key. It's very easy for most of us to do this.
Up on screen now: Ben, business; Mark, corporation; Sally, wedding; Rebecca, home.
The difficulty emerges when I am asked to switch. Now I have to use the left button of the computer to respond to Sally and office, or Sally and leader, and Mark and kitchen. And all of a sudden, my brain is completely confused about this.
Ben, marriage; Mark, children; Anna, office; Paul, children; Sally, professional.
And because it's confused, it takes me longer, I make more errors. And so the difference in speed to do these is a very good indicator of how strong my bias is in the domain of gender and career.
Have you done the test yourself?
Absolutely, yeah. And I will tell you that it was the most humbling moment of my life in the mid-1990s when I took my first implicit association test. It was the race test, dark and light-skinned faces with features that are more Afrocentric or Eurocentric.
So you get the faces on screen and you have to link them to concepts like cheerful, pleasing, love, attractive. Then there's awful, annoy, evil, gross, dirty, ugly. And you have to do it as quick as you can. Microseconds matter. So your implicit bias was black bad?
Yes. It was a strong association of white with good and black with bad. I am the perfect candidate to be neutral.
Yeah, you're from India originally.
I am originally from India. But I'm from a country that is extremely color conscious. It might make a difference to a girl as to how much dowry she will bring home, depending on that small shade of difference in skin color. So it doesn't surprise me. I must have learned that white is good over and over again.
And it's a great test for research purposes because in England, people have done...
Professor Banerjee's tests are being used by companies to help employees understand that hidden biases are real. And Yahoo is one of those companies that's been doing the tests.
I learned, and what I suspected is that I too have biases, like many, many people. I don't think I was totally aware of the extent of those.
Marjane Moore-Roberts is Yahoo's global head of inclusive diversity.
I'm a person who's black, but I have a bias against black people. I am a person who's overweight. I have a bias against people who are overweight. I'm a woman, yet I have a bias against women. But more interestingly, it was the difficulty to associate things that are traditionally female with male. So home male, cooking male. And I'm the breadwinner in my family, and my husband does all the cooking. And I know this. So I am not exempt. None of us are exempt.
In what other fields can you detect this hidden bias, apart from gender?
Pretty much everything. So, for example, there's a lot of research around things like ethnicity. So if you look at the research around, for example, how a doctor treats patients who are less similar to him or her, they tend to prescribe medication more accurately for people who are like them. To get the analgesia, the painkiller right for people like them, they tend to have better working relationships with people who are like them. Well, you can realise the implications in healthcare, therefore, of people who are similar to them getting a certain kind of treatment comparative to those who don't.
I'm Kayla Benjamin. I am a training consultant.
You're not, though, are you? You're not Kayla Benjamin.
Okay, yeah, that needs unravelling. My professional name is Kayla Benjamin. To those that know me on a personal level, they'd know me as Kayo Anosike, which is my Nigerian name of birth, yeah.
You changed your name?
I did change my name.
Kayo used to be head of music at a London college, and there, she says, names didn't matter. It was only after she did a master's in business psychology and began applying for jobs that she began to feel her Nigerian heritage was counting against her.
I'd chosen to do a thesis on unconscious bias, and I remembered that there was quite a strong case for name bias in employment and recruitment in the UK and in the USA. At this point, having been 3-4 months down the line, unemployed, getting a bit worried, I thought I'd play a game, actually. I thought I'd make applying for jobs a little less tedious, and I thought, oh, well, why don't I try this little experiment? I've been doing some research. So I didn't change my CV at all. I just changed the name on my CV and applied for a job, and I pretty much got a response by the end of the week, and I was sitting at a desk doing a job near enough in my field 10 days later.
That wasn't Kayo, though. That was Kayla.
That was Kayla.
You've no doubt that it was the name change that got you in to interview.
I think the name change allowed me to get seen. This was the issue.
Kayo Anosike is her name for the work she does in music and art, but in the office, Kayo becomes Kayla.
Once again, in different parts of Ferguson, protesters are starting to take to the streets.
In 2014, an 18-year-old unarmed black man called Michael Brown was shot and killed by a white police officer. The day after, the protests and the riots began.
We gotta fight for our rights.
My name is Patrick Breyer, and I am a criminal defense attorney, or specifically a public defender in St. Louis, Missouri.
He's concerned that unconscious bias plays an important and dangerous role in the fields of policing and of justice.
I had a jury trial coming up quickly after the tragic shooting of Michael Brown, and I saw the press coverage of the different protesting, the burning of buildings, the police coming out with riot gear, the response of the protesters. And I started thinking, what are my jurors who are going to decide the fate of one of my clients 1 week from today? What are they thinking? How are they going to be impacted? We all have implicit biases within us that have been brought about by cultural messaging in our societies that portray people of color as unfortunately different because of the white majority that we see in our cultural messaging. And that greatly impacts the case of my clients.
I can give you one example, and it's tuning out. That's where I will offer a solution, particularly a technical solution at a meeting, and no one will quite hear it until somebody else, typically a bloke, will repeat it, and everyone will be like, oh, mate, that was a great idea. And no one quite hears that that was something that myself or another woman had already previously said. And whenever I give this example in talks, all the women sort of nod their heads and they're like, yep, that's happened before. And the men are like, no, we never do that. And it's because we subtly expect the voice of a man to be the voice of authority, or for whatever reason.
We are born with the mechanism that produces the bias. Our minds are the products of evolution.
The actual neurological wiring for it seems to go back anthropologically.
And our minds are very good learning machines. By good, I mean that we try to make snap decisions quickly so that they allow us to survive to the next day.
They are part of our fight or flight response, which we would now regard as our emotional response in the brain. And they were necessary things that we had to do when we were running on the savannas and keeping away from other tribes and keeping away from saber-toothed tigers. And they still are useful to a certain regard today, but they've just become a problem when we come to interact with other people who are different to us.
But of course, our minds are not completely accurate detectors of information, and so our culture is the biggest input.
Nick Logie and the Orchestra of the Age of Enlightenment are very aware of this. So, to combat unconscious bias, the first stage of auditions for the group are done blind. The candidates play out of sight of the judges.
If I can't see them, I'm just hearing them. I'm just listening to what they produce.
Sounds like a strange question, but when you're doing the screened auditions, do you ask the people to take their shoes off?
Yes, absolutely. Because it's fascinating for us, the jury, sitting behind the screen. We're using everything we possibly can to try and detect who that person is. And I know my colleagues have played games with trying to guess the gender, and it's impossible. You really can't. But yes, we'll use every facility we can. And of course, blocking our sight just means our ears are that much sharper. So we could easily pick up the sound of heels when the candidate comes in.
So what have been the consequences for your orchestra of this new kind of recruitment policy?
It has two factors. One is not to favour people that we already know, and also for our colleagues not to feel that they've been excluded for any internal political reasons. But almost more importantly, we discover people that we didn't know about, that we might not discover quite so easily without the screens.
We know quite a bit about how to combat these biases. For example, positive contact seems to have an effect on it. So the more we meet people from a group for whom we might have a bias in a positive context, less easy we are to quickly sort them, categorise those people and make judgments against them.
We don't need to know the gender. You need to be screening the skills. There is so much talent out there that is not getting through, and that would be invaluable to organisations.
The researchers have found that you can attack implicit bias in jury selection when you have this open dialogue about race. It makes jurors kind of look within themselves to think about what might be happening here with me.
What Yahoo has the opportunity to do here is identify the biases within ourselves and figure out how to disrupt them when they're not serving our greater purpose well.
Thanks for listening to The Y Factor. If you'd like to hear more episodes, do visit the website bbcworldservice.com/Y Factor.